There is a power in the storm that the world has tried to map but failed. For as long as people have looked at the sky, they've searched for twin gods of thunder, a duality of lightning that strikes twice. One of your comments literally asks for that, but when you check the sources, you find nothing, because these gods did not live where we assume they do. Africa, the cradle of the divine, held no such twin. But when you look deeper, the map shifts. Halfway across the world, in the heat of the Mayan jungles, you find something close. Here, the sky doesn't just hold one god, it holds two in even. But these aren't just deities of the sky. They aren't exactly thunder gods even. They are the architects of the underworld. And unlike the gods you know, their power wasn't meant to be worshipped. It was meant to be survived. We aren't just looking at the Mayan twin gods, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. We're looking at why death itself needed two challenges. But here is the first thing that stops me cold when I start pulling at this thread. Most gods who embody overwhelming power across human mythology, Zeus, Thor, Shango, Indra, are singular. One god, one sky, one will. The ancients seemed almost universally drawn to the idea that power at that scale could only belong to one being. So why did the Maya break from that? Why did they look at the same heavens and see two? That question alone should make you pause before we go any further, because the answer isn't just theological, it's psychological. It tells us something about what the Maya believed power actually was, and more importantly, what they believed it cost. And this is where this story begins, not in the sky, but on the ground. Before Hunahpu and Xbalanque were heroes, before they challenged death itself, they were sons of a dead man. Literally, their father, Hunahpu, had gone before them into the darkness of Xibalba, the Mayan underworld, and he had not come back. Well, not in one piece. What came back was a head. A severed head hung in a calabash tree like it protects fruit, a warning from the lords of death to anyone arrogant enough to challenge their rule. And somehow, impossibly, that head breathed on a young woman named Squeak, and she became pregnant with the twins. But wait, think about that for a second. These boys entered the world as children of death itself. Their origin story isn't a birth, it's a resurrection attempt. They didn't come from triumph, they came from defeat, from humiliation, from the rotten legacy of a father who lost everything he had. And somehow, that was supposed to make them the most powerful beings in the cosmos. I find that extraordinary because if you think about it, that isn't how most civilizations wrote their divine heroes. Most cultures gave their gods pristine origins, born from the sea foam, born from the mind of a supreme deity, or born from light. But the Maya gave their divine heroes grief, ancestral trauma, a starting point soaked in loss. And I can't help but wonder, was that intentional? Was that the Maya saying something about where real power comes from? That it isn't inherited from victory, but forged out by surviving what destroyed the generation before you. Now, Hunahpu and Xbalanque did not have an easy childhood. Their older half-brothers, Hunbats and Hunchonwen, despised and ridiculed them, worked them like servants, but the twins endured it, not because they were weak, but because, and this is where the Popol Vuh, the Maya secret text, makes clear in its structure, because they were watching, learning, and waiting for the right time. They were already, even as young boys, thinking strategically about power, in a way most divine beings in world mythology simply do not. Unlike many famous gods whose power comes from overwhelming force, these two children born from the whisper of a dead man's severed head, they were already playing a longer game than anyone around them understood. And that should scare you even more because the question it raises is this: what kind of god calculates from childhood? What does it mean that the Maya convinced of divine power not as a raw force handed down from above, but as something earned through patience, endurance, and deeply deliberate thinking? That is not a small theological statement. That's a civilization telling you exactly how they believed the universe worked, that power was not given, it was survived into. The twins eventually outsmarted their older brother with a trick so precise it felt almost cruel. They convinced Hunbats and Hunchonwen to climb a tree, told them there was some fruit up there, and then, through their supernatural ability to manipulate the world, they transformed the older brothers into monkeys. Just like that, two humans turned into animals. And the Popol Vuh records this with an absolute unsettling calm. No expression of divine wrath, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet surgical removal of the obstacle. And then the twins moved on. That coldness, that efficiency, I keep coming back to because it tells you something about what the story is actually about. This isn't a myth about God who are good. This is a myth about gods who win. And the space between those two things is enormous, and the Maya knew it and they built it directly into the very character of their divine heroes. But this is only the beginning of the escalation, because the thing you have to understand about Xibalba or the Mayan underworld is this. It wasn't a place of death in a way Western mythology frames the underworld. It wasn't a waiting room for souls. It wasn't a punishment dimension even. Xibalba was a kingdom, a full, functioning, brutal, politically complex kingdom, ruled by 12 lords with names that could literally give you a goosebump. 1 death and 7 deaths at the top. Below them, Scrap Stripper, Blood Gatherer, Demon of Puss, Demon of Jaundice, Blood Scepter, Skull Scepter, Demon of Filth, Demon of Woe, Wing, and Packstrap. These weren't symbolic abstractions. The Maya gave these beings names that could describe specific physical forms of human suffering. They weren't just the concept of death, they were the catalogue of everything death does to a body, and they ruled a realm that had its own courts, its own rules, games, and even politics. And here is where the story shifts into something I find genuinely unsettling when I think about it. Xibalba sent a summon. The Lords of the Dead had noticed the twins were playing a game, the Mesoamerica ball game, a ritualistic sport that had enormous sacred significance in Maya culture, and the noise, the sound of the ball striking the court, disturbed the lords on the ground. It offended them, and so they sent messengers, an owl, calling the twins down into the underworld to play. And strangely, the twins accepted. Now, stop for a moment, because this is the part of the story I found most intriguing. The invitation to Xibalba wasn't a trap in the obvious sense. The Lords of Death weren't lying about what they wanted. They genuinely wanted to play the ball game, and yet every single person who had ever accepted that invitation had died. The twins' own father and uncle had gone before them and had been destroyed, humiliated, tricked, and sacrificed. The road to Xibalba was lined with the memory of their failure, and yet these twins said yes. Why? Why would two beings who are so clearly intelligent, so clearly strategic, walk directly into the mouth of the place that killed their father? And I think the answer is more unsettling than anything the Lords of Death themselves represent. The twins didn't go to Xibalba because they had to. They went because they had a plan. And a plan that requires descending into the underworld isn't a plan born from confidence. It's a plan born from something much more dangerous, from a willingness to use death itself as a tool to enter the place of ultimate destruction and come out having bent it to your will. That is not heroism in any conventional sense. That is something else entirely, something colder. The descent into Xibalba reads like a gauntlet sequence from some ancient game, but with real deaths at every single checkpoint. The twins passed through rivers of blood without drinking, through rivers of pools without flinching. They came to 4 crossroads, black, white, yellow, and red, and the Lords of Death had placed wooden mannequins at the entrance dressed to look like the actual lords, hoping the twins would greet the dummies with respect and reveal their ignorance. But the twins had sent a mosquito ahead of them, a single insect acting as a spy, and it had bitten each of the lords in turn, making them cry out in pain. And the twins listened to those cries and memorized every single one of their name. And when they walked in, they addressed each lord by name, every single one of them. And the silence that must have followed that moment in the court of Xibalba, the silence of a kingdom that had just realized its enemy knew everything he thought was hidden. That silence must have been the loudest thing in the underworld. But the Lords of Death weren't done. They had houses of torment prepared. The dark house where there was no light, the cold house filled with unbearable rattling cold, the jaguar house filled with jaguars, the fire house filled with fire, and the bat house. And here is where the story does something that genuinely makes me stop reading for a moment when I first encountered this. In the bat house, Hunahpu lost his head. Not metaphorically, literally. A bat creature named Kamazot, the death bat, the lord of bats, descended into the night while the twins were shuddering inside a blowgun and cut off Hunahpu's head. And the lords of Xibalba celebrated. They hung the head the ball caught, and Xbalanque, still alive, still thinking, did not panic. He went to the animals of the forest and asked them to bring him food. And the animals brought him a coati, a small turtle-shelled animal. And Xbalanque carved, shaped, and fitted it perfectly on Hunahpu's neck as a temporary head. And then he sent a rabbit to the ball court with instructions. Soon the games began, and the lords kicked the severed head of Hunahpu as the ball. Xbalanque hit it at exactly the right angle, and the rabbit bolted. And the lords chased the rabbit thinking the ball had escaped. And in that moment of distraction, Xbalanque recovered his brother's real head and reattached it. Now, I have thought about that scene more times than I can count because it operates on so many levels simultaneously. It is tactical, it is grotesque, it is darkly funny too. In a way, the most ancient stories can be both horrifying and almost absurdly clever at once. But underneath all of that, it is telling you something about these two brothers that no speech in the entire Popol Vuh says directly. It is telling you that even when one of them is literally decapitated, the other does not stop thinking. Xbalanque did not mourn, he did not rage, he improvised, he got a coati, carved it into a head, used a rabbit as a decoy, and got his brother's head back during an active ball game in the middle of the underworld. That's a different category of being. And whatever category that is, it makes me deeply curious about what the Maya thought divine power actually looked like at its highest expression. Because this is a moment in the story where I think the real thesis of the entire myth reveals itself. We have been watching these twins since their impossible birth, through childhood patience, through the cold removal of their brother, through a voluntary descent into the place of death, through torture houses and rivers of blood. And in every single moment, the defining quality hasn't been strength, it hasn't been thunder even, it hasn't been lightning in a way we picture it, dramatic, explosive, uncontainable. The defining quality had been adaptability, the ability to think inside the worst possible situation and find the one action that changes it. And that, I think, is why the sky has two faces. Not because the Maya needed two gods to throw bolts across the sky, but because they understood that real power, the kind that survives and reshapes and endures, cannot live in a single body. You needed two minds, two perspectives, two beings who can cover for each other when one of them literally loses their head. But the story isn't done, and this is where it goes somewhere no mythology I've ever studied quite goes. The twins knew they were going to die, so they planned for their own deaths. They found two diviners, men named Shulu and Pakam, and gave them precise instructions for what to do with their bones after the lords of Xibalba killed them. Then they went to the court musicians of Xibalba, two men named Hunahpu Possum and Hunahpu Coyote, and they announced openly, "We are going to die at dawn." And the musicians wept, but the twins told them not to weep, but to play their music. And in the morning, the twins jumped into a great stone oven, killed of fire, that the lords of death had prepared as a final execution, and they burned. The lords of death were ecstatic. They had finally won. They had the greatest enemies they had ever faced, the children of the man they had killed before them. And now these children were ash, and they ground the bones and threw them into a river and celebrated. And 5 days later, Hunahpu and Xbalanque rose from the river. Not immediately, not dramatically. They came back as catfish at first, then as ragged wandering performers, vagabonds nobody recognized. And this is the detail that haunts me the most about the entire Popol Vuh. The divine twin gods, the hero of the sky, came back to life as beggars, as street entertainers, as the people that society does not look at. And they went into Xibalba in that disguise, doing tricks, performing miracles. They danced, they set a dog on fire and brought it back. They burnt a house and restored it. They cut off a human's head and reattached it. And the lords of death were so delighted that they demanded the twins perform the trick on them. And the twins said yes, and they cut off the heads of 1 death and 7 deaths, the 2 supreme lords of Xibalba, and they did not bring it that. And that moment, that single moment, is one of the most precise, devastating acts of divine violence in any mythology on earth. And what makes it so extraordinary is that it wasn't a battle, it wasn't a war even, it was a performance. The Lord of Death were so hungry for their own entertainment that they handed the twins the permission to kill them. They asked to be deceived, they chose it, and the twins, who had planned this from the moment they descended into the underworld, maybe even from the moment they were born from the dead man's written skull, delivered exactly what they promised. With 1 death and 7 deaths destroyed, the remaining lords of Xibalba collapsed. They begged for mercy, they surrendered, and the twins gave mercy. But with conditions. From that day forward, the lords of Xibalba would no more have power over the just. They could have the guilty, the wicked, the violent, but they could no longer touch the innocent. They could no longer summon the righteous to their courts. Death had been renegotiated. The underworld had been restructured, not by an army, not by a supreme creator god descending in wrath, but by 2 boys who refused to stay dead. Hunahpu and Xbalanque rose into the sky. One became the sun, one became the moon, or in some versions of the myth, one became the sun and the other became Venus, the morning star, the planet that disappears and reappears, that dies and recycles on a celestial cycle, and they shone on the world their father never got to illuminate. There is something in that ending that I find almost unbearably moving in a way I didn't expect when I started researching the story. Because the twins did not become thunder gods in the way you would expect. They are associated with lightning. Yes, Hunahpu, their father, is connected in Maya cosmology to the maize god, and so the hero twins inherit that celestial domain. But they do not spend their ascended existence throwing bolts at people. They become light itself. They became the constant daily rising and returning light that the world depends on. After everything, the torment, the decapitation, the fire, the death, the rebirth, what they became was not a weapon, it was a promise. The promise that the sky comes back every morning, that light, no matter how many times it's extinguished, finds a way to return. And now I have to ask the question I have been cycling since the beginning. Why twins? What is the Maya cosmology trying to say by insisting that this particular power, the power that descended into death and restructured it, had to be shared between two beings? And I think the Maya understood something about power that we have largely forgotten in the modern world, where we tend to celebrate singular genius, singular leadership, or singular divine authority. The Maya looked at the sky and saw that the most dangerous, most transformative, most enduring form of power in existence is not the kind that lives in one place. It is the kind that is split, that divides, that has two names because it has two functions. One that moves forward while the other thinks, one that acts while the other recovers, and one that faces the sword while the other tries to retrieve its head. Power that is doubled is not just stronger, it is survivable. It can lose half of itself and still continue. It can be born and still rise because the two parts carry each other through the moment when one was ash. And when I look at that idea through the lens of right now, through a world that seems increasingly to be in love with the mythology of the singular, the one strong man, the one nation, the one correct path, the Maya twin gods feel almost like a warning, not a comfortable one. The Popol Vuh is not telling you that power shared is power diminished. It is telling you the exact opposite. It is telling you that power concentrated in one name, one hand, one heel. That is the power that Xibalba represents. That is the power that puts severed heads in trade. That is the power that invites you into a court and kills you with hospitality. And it is the twins, divided, they doubled, the two named, who walked into that power and ended it. But here is the final knot I cannot fully untangle, and I want to leave it with you because I think it matters. Hunahpu and Xbalanque avenged their father, but they did not resurrect him. Hunahpu, the man whose severed head started everything, was not saved. He was honored, he was transformed, he became the maize god, associated with the circle of corn and rebirth in the earth. But he did not ascend the way his sons did. He did not become the son, and the Popol Vuh never fully explains why. It just leaves it there. The sons rose, the father stayed below, except to notice that it makes the story feel real in a way that myths rarely do. Because in real life, it is often how it works. The generation that is destroyed by a system does not always live to see the system fail. The people who fought the first battles, who were consumed by the darkness they were trying to expose, who ended up as warning in a tree, they don't always get the sunrise. Sometimes the only thing they get is that their children remember what they were, and their children, shaped by the memories, shaped by that grief, walked back into the darkness and finished what they couldn't. The Maya knew something deep in their bones about the relationship between ancestral loss and inherited power, about how a civilization survives the worst things done to it, about how you can be born from a severed head and still become the son. And that is why death needed two challengers, because one name was never enough to carry all of that. Because some burdens are so ancient, so heavy, so loaded with the weight of what came before them, that they can only be carried by two. And the sky every morning, without fail, proves that they are still up there, still carrying it, still rising.